Evelyn, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I'm so excited to finally meet you.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so fun.
So, I was just telling you this. I've been following Yumi for so long now. Can you just give us first a little bit of background into what you were doing before Yumi? You have a very impressive background. Both you and your co founder have a very impressive background. Can you kind of just walk us through before the evolution of Yumi?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I had a very different path before I hard pivoted into this wild world of entrepreneurship. So I was a storyteller, I was a journalist for more than a decade. I was at the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. I started off in my career actually as a foreign correspondent out in Southeast Asia. And so covered a wide range of topics, everything from avian influenza, which was not quite obviously the pandemic of today, but it was an interesting topic then as well. Everything to the tsunami. Yeah, it was like a really fascinating front seat into Southeast Asia, the region of the world. That office is based in Jakarta. And then I eventually fell in love with business journalism and shedding light on important stories in innovation and tech. Covered everything from the Facebook IPO when I was at the New York Times, and then was last the innovation reporter at the Wall Street Journal based in San Francisco. And I think there are parallels when you kind of step back and think about the contrast of being a journalist and also then building a company, right? It became for me when we started Yumi the story I couldn't stop thinking about. And what I mean by that is that the why of Yumi really came down to this bigger mission of how do you raise a healthier generation. So my co-founder and I have been friends for years that predate the company. So while I was a journalist, I met her. She jokes that she married me first to my husband because that's exactly what you do when you become co-founders. But when she became a mom for the first time, she was telling me about all this research that she was unearthing around the importance of the 1,000 days, about nutrition during the first years of life, right? And so she had created this Dropbox folder of every clinical study that she could find on the topic, because every parent, every new first-time parent goes down this rabbit hole of Google research. And I think Angela, she's sort of the math nerd, the data nerd to my English major nerd. So she majored in mathematics. She always is drawn to numbers and understanding data sets. I joke that she thinks and speaks in data sets. But, when she was pulling all this primary research, it was just really eye-opening around how specific nutrients really have an outsized impact on your kids' brain development, specifically during this time. And I think we grew up in an era where it felt like it was the parents who had to worry about their waistlines and kids had their whole lifetime to worry. So like let them eat all the cupcakes. And obviously as we mature as a generation and we learn the impact of food and food as thy medicine and really understand and linking those dots, you actually realize what profound impact nutrition has. And no period is that more important than this early years, right? And so that ultimately became, such an eye-opening volume of research that we're like, well, there's many ways that you can translate this. Like you can think about this as like a nonprofit social movement. You could go to Capitol Hill, you talk about standards for baby food, kids food. And what we realized where we could make the most impact, and I think like I was also influenced by having this front seat in entrepreneurship, was creating a company at scale that could change consumers' perceptions and help educate them and create the linkages between the dots of that nutrition and development and lifetime of health. So that's kind of like the hard pivot, but why I also see these parallels and the same things that drew me initially to becoming a storyteller and shedding light on important stories ultimately became the reason why I took that leap. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded of an answer, but
No,
that's how I got here.
I love it. No, I was reading both of your backgrounds and I'm like, this is unconventional, but kind of the dream partnership because Angela's coming from this like this private equity investment banking background and your Wall Street Journal, New York Times, like being able to tell a story, a full storyteller, which both of those brains are so vital, I think, in building a brand. So I think it's really, really cool, both of your backgrounds, how they come together. So
Thanks.
you,
We joke that we have one good brain between us.
you
The
like a
left and
mega
the right
brain.
coming together.
So you had never been an entrepreneur before, right? This was your first time building a company. And how was that process for you? Like, did you quit your job to do this?
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
absolutely. And I didn't have like a big safety net. We just had so much conviction. I mean, I think I look back on it, I was like, that was a pretty ballsy move. Like that's pretty crazy. Like, I could understand why my parents were like, "Are you sure? Like you could go to law school. Like you could, being typical Asian parents." And Angela had a very, very comfortable, highly respected career in finance. She was a director, the only female director of her private equity firm at the time, you know, obviously making a great salary at this firm. And we just left it all behind because we realized that this needed to exist in the world. And there was just this moment where I thought about like, I didn't have children at the time. I actually don't have children. I married my husband. We're still in the family planning stage of it. But even then, when I was thinking about, should I do this? There was this moment where I imagined my, like, I guess, fictional project, like my future children. And I thought about like putting them to bed and, you know, thinking about how they would ask me ultimately, like how I spent my days, why I did what I did, what was I doing the hours that I didn't see them. And I wanted it to be this answer, right? And so that was just such a compelling drive. Like that was, I kind of just like moodboarded that in my head a bit. And I was just like, that's what I want my life to be. That's what I want every day to add up to. So the process of unpacking this and figuring out how to start a company, on one hand, I was a student in a way of like observing businesses, understanding kind of the the kind of like variables that help build towards a successful business and the things that can help fall apart. But at the same time, nothing can ever prepare you for co-founding a company, right? It is so crazy the number of decisions that you have to make often simultaneously when it's just you and a co-founder in the very beginning. And so Angela and I joke about this a lot. Where like when you go to a startup and you see like a stapler on a desk, you're like, at some point someone had to make the decision of which stapler to buy. And like in the beginning, it's
So
you. And so
true.
whether it's like unpacking, figuring out HR and recruiting and all of that, or buying the stapler, or, how do you get to, the first sale, like all those things have to be unraveled. And I think like what helped as a journalist, and it's interesting, like this was actually said about, not that I compare myself at all, but Mike Moritz used to be a famous journalist before he went into the world of venture capital. And, people used to ask, like, what made him, a compelling candidate to go into obviously one of the most venerated VC firms in Silicon Valley. And they said it was the questions that he asked, right? Like knowing that you have to ask a lot of questions to figure out the solution. And I think there's such a humbleness in being a journalist and knowing that you are always operating with an imperfect data set. So knowing that and knowing like it'll never be perfect, but how do you ask the right questions to get close as possible to making the most educated, decision, or getting to the most whole story. And so I think that led me to ask a lot of people in the industry, ask a lot of friends of friends, and be like shameless in asking questions and being very dogged in that. Um, I think ultimately you do have to make decisions on things, but having that humbleness and just knowing you don't have the answers and there could be a better answer out there really did help.
That is so insightful. And you are truly constantly asking questions. And if you find someone who has spent time finding the answers, it will save you so much time just asking people who already know what they're doing. I love that. So you make this decision. You're like, I know what I want. You have this vision of the life that you want to live. How do you guys go about the first stages of, okay, let's actually build this? Like, did you come together and create any sort of non-negotiables or things where you're like, this is how we know we're being successful. This is how we're going to actually launch this.
Yeah, I mean, well, first we took a personality test, which I know sounds kind of
Which
funny,
one?
but just Myers-Briggs, and then we
Myers-Briggs,
would
yeah.
talk, yeah. So, and then we would talk about it, and I know that sounds kind of funny, but like even though Angela and I were friends, and I knew her very well as a friend, being a business partner is a whole other leap, right? It's a whole other relationship. As I joked, it's like marriage. The intimacy of co-founding a company with someone and laying all your strengths and weaknesses out there and on a day-to-day basis, trying to make decisions together. That is one of the most intimate relationships you can possibly have. And so we were like, we have to kind of be honest about who we are and, you know, just be really, I think, thoughtful and intentional in that relationship and making sure that when we fight, because we're going to disagree, we're going to debate. We both have strong opinions as two people, but you want to make sure you debate in a way where that you're going to be married at the end of the day. And so we took a personality test. It's like that was step one for us. Like I moved in with Angela, we took these personality tests. We were like trying to figure out how to build our marriage to be the best, so that we could scale a company on that foundation. And so, just knowing like I am an INFJ, she's an INTJ. So we're actually very similar. We have the same like, values, but the idea of like so a Myers-Briggs, like the thinking versus feeling, it's actually not that she doesn't feel or I don't think, right? Like but the logic versus emotional pull of people. I think it was a really interesting conversation that we had, and we really did come into it thinking very carefully about that relationship because we knew the stability of that company, the ability to scale would be, would live or die based on that initial relationship. And then I think businesses are always just people. Every business is a people business, right? And so from that, you'll make all these other decisions, also like who you hire and things like that. So that was step one. And then step two was like, okay, like let's build out a deck. Let's build out like what a rough financial model should be. And thankfully, obviously, Angela has the finance side covered. And so then we would ask friends like, can we have a deck that you have? Like, can we have a deck from your early stage company? What was your first deck? You can Google like, even Uber's first deck is out there. And so again, we were kind of students of this because we were like, well, we never made a pitch deck, but we're going to need some capital in order to do like a test pilot program to make sure we're going to get to this product market fit. And so getting help in that respect and then building out kind of that initial deck, which helps you think through what your model should be, like it just helps organize the way you're thinking about your company and how it scales and what is like the 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. So I felt like that was a good force function for us as we thought about the framework for this business. And then, obviously we needed it to eventually raise money from friends and family. But those were like the first steps of like, okay, we got to figure out the skeleton of building this business.
I love that. No, a lot of co-founders I've heard go to actual therapy together, like a weekly therapy
Yeah.
meeting. And I'm like, yes, it's a full marriage. So let's talk about fundraising then, because you touched on that for a sec. So did you
Hmm.
start with friends and fam fundraising round? Was that
Yeah.
your first? Okay. And how was that
Yeah.
process for you? Because that is very intimate and personal and probably, I can imagine, hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I feel like we're really lucky in having a network or having work built up a network where we had access to people who, were regular investors in the startup world, right? And so we definitely wanted to make sure that whoever was investing in our company was very comfortable with like the dynamics of investing in startups. I mean, startups like have a very high failure rate, right? And so you don't want this to be like 10, 20% of someone's entire portfolio. You want to make sure that you're reaching out to investors who are very comfortable with that risk. And I think we were really lucky and having some relationships, and then one investor we'd be like, who else should we talk to? And so again, I really think we're privileged in that respect and being able to figure out like how to build this network of investors. But it's taking a lot of no's to the chin, and I think you get very comfortable with the no's very fast and realizing that oftentimes it's not personal. It's there's most investors will have to say no in most meetings, right? So you have to give them a reason to say yes, and you just can't take it personally because you will, on balance, always have more no's. Like even the Ubers of the world initially had more no's before they had all the yeses, and so I think like having that framework, expecting that, and getting really desensitized to the no's, that really helped. But it was lots and lots of phone calls and meetings and just expecting that, the majority would not be yeses, but that there you would. I don't know. I think Angela and I always had this conviction that like this needed to exist. We felt like we were pretty good situated in terms of our vision and our like capabilities to make this work. And so it was on us to be as clear as we could be around the vision of this company. And like ultimately we were going to get there, right? Like that if we just kept knocking on the doors, picking up the phone, like we knew that we were right in this vision. And so inevitably we were going to get there. And so it's just, you got to be humble, expect the no's, but also confident enough that you just keep on knocking on the doors. And I always, there's a great concept in Good to Great, where, it's this idea that entrepreneurs who are in it for the long haul or have a higher rate of success or tend to be short-term pragmatists, right? So you're like looking right ahead of you, all the pitfalls that might happen, like the things that are going to kind of suck in the interim, but then they're long-term optimists. And
Oh
so
my God, that's
Angela and
good.
I think, yeah, and I think it makes total sense. Like you believe in the vision. You know like there's a path where you can get there. And it's just like, okay, let's like understand the realities of today. But like if you believe in that like around the cornerness of this, then you're just gonna keep going. And so you gotta keep going. You gotta take all the no's. Next call. Next call.
Yes. Oh, that's really, really good. So you started in 2015, right? It's
Hmm.
probably
Yeah.
feels like it's gone fast. I feel like 2015 was not
Yeah.
a long time ago, but it was. It was almost 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
6, yeah.
And it was like a slow start, right? At first it was like, okay, what are we gonna do? Okay, like let's raise some capital, friends and family. Like you take a long time in building out that vision and what the product could be. You spent a long time doing the test pilot program. People were like, can you guys even make food that kids and babies are gonna want? Or like, yeah, we can figure this out. But like there's so
Yeah.
much like skepticism that you have to prove out. And then we like, finally got to a point where we're launching it in California in 2017, but we've actually only been national since 2019, so
Wow.
it's been a long and short road in some ways.
Yeah, that's what I was so from the first year in 2015 to now, how much has changed? Like looking back, does that just feel like a totally different business? How much would you say you've evolved from that first year of how you guys run the business?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has changed. I also feel like we were babies back then. We kind of joke that like startup years are kind of like when a president goes through their like term in office, right? Like they start off, they have like full head of hair. It's like they're looking great. They don't really have that many wrinkles. It's like pretty good. And then by the end of it, it's like, oh my God, what have they seen? Like, their whole head is like
What is
white
this?
and they like have all these like and I feel like I've aged 15 years in that period, so you
You
kind of
look
get
good,
sucked
girl. I
into the
don't know.
vortex.
I don't know what you're
Thank you,
talking about.
thank you. But you feel it, you
Yeah.
definitely feel it. And then so your question was like what has changed. I think we learned a lot, and I totally get why people invest in like second time founders, even if that first business didn't do well. It's like, oh, we joke there's like the first time founder tax. Like you're just gonna have a larger margin of error than like a second time founder because you learn a shit ton and you're like, I wouldn't have done this that way if I was to turn
Totally.
back the clock.
Yes.
So that I think has changed. I think, but what stays the same, right, is I think the mission and like the North Stars of the business, the kind of impact we wanted to create. And so while there may be some adjustments in terms of the experience, it gets improved, all that stuff, like the why of what we were doing and the fundamentals have actually been the same, which I feel like really proud of. Like if I think a lot of businesses generally change over the years from when they started, but I also love the things that stayed the same. And so I'm very proud of that.
You should be very proud. Was there a point where you felt like you made it? Where you're like, oh my
Oh my
gosh, we
God.
are a real company?
Still waiting for that point. I mean, there's definitely a point where you're like, oh, the lights won't go off tomorrow. So there's
Yeah.
that, but I wouldn't say that's like, I made it, shout it from the rooftops, I made it. So no, I mean, like, I think I'm just someone who there's so much more to this. I feel like I feel like we're in the first inning, and I know we've had such great traction. We're feeding 3% of babies in America. In places like Miami, it's like 9%, and that's incredible, right? Like it feels like a real thing, that's for sure. But I just feel like this is inning one, right? And so I'm like, anyone who's like, "Wow, aren't you so like happy with what you've accomplished?" I'm like, I guess accomplish, that term feels so nebulous to me, right? Like I feel like, but there's so much more to accomplish. So when I look at the scales of what is to be accomplished versus what we've accomplished, I'm like, we have work to do. Like, speak to me later kind of thing. Like I just, the idea of mission accomplished, I guess, is just feels so far in that way.
Right.
But like it's not in my nature, and it's something I have to work on. It's actually something I see as a weakness in me, and that I don't celebrate the moments that I should. And I remember when we raised our first, venture round, and August Capital led that round, and actually it was Angela's husband, Angus, who's such a wonderful person, and he like brought us these like champagne flutes, and he was like, "You should keep these." And he's like, "I know this isn't like, the end all be all. Like this is just a starting point, but like you guys should realize like you got to celebrate the moments, right? You got to let yourself be a little happy, let yourself be like, pat yourself on the back sometimes." And I think that's an important thing. It's just not something I naturally can do well, I would say.
Almost every entrepreneur who I speak to, I think identifies with this. And it's, you're moving so quickly, I would say, to go to the next level, go to the next level. And then you get to that level and you're like, okay, now here's our new normal. And then from there, it's just you keep going up. So feeling like you've made it is just like so hard to identify because you're looking, continually up. But I
Totally.
agree, you have to celebrate or else you'll never feel that sense. Because I mean, you are everywhere. I see Yumi everywhere. The brand is so recognizable and successful. So yes, I feel like take a moment for sure because I think
Yeah.
that you
No,
feel
it's
incredible.
there's so many things, and it's funny what will actually hit you in the feels, and make you think back and be like, "Oh, man, like we made something." And it's like I get emotional when people come up to me and they're like, "I think my kid likes vegetables because of you guys," or like, "This was such a huge help in my first year of being a mom," and I just love those stories. Like it's that's everything, because then like you kind of like zoom out and you feel into the future of like, okay, if that kid is eating veggies, maybe they're gonna have a better life. Maybe when they have kids, like those kids are more likely to eat more veggies too, right? And you kind of like, I think, fantasize about like what future that could, be. And so I love that. Like when it gets down to this personal moment and someone's like, you've touched my life or touched my kid's life in a certain way, in a specific way. Ah, that's fuel for like a couple more days, like it's like it's extra little energy boost, I would say. It's like that's great,
Yeah.
even in the toughest of times.
Yeah, I feel like it brings you back to your mission too, why you guys started in the first place.
Oh yeah,
So,
absolutely.
when you guys are making your projections, how far ahead are you generally planning in the future? Like, do you guys sit and do your 1 year, 5 year, or are you kind of like, what are we doing this month?
Yeah, no, I mean, it depends on the moment, right? But I think you just have to constantly flip back and forth between, okay, what are we doing this week? What are we doing this quarter? What are we doing next year? Like, what's a 12-month plan? And then what are we doing in 5 and 10 years? Because like those should all ladder up to like that 5, 10 years. And I always loved, and again, you could probably tell I'm like a student of business, but I love learning from all these companies that have come before. And like Walt Disney, like they created an entire map. Like there's, you should Google it because it's excellent. And it was like, decades past of like what Walt Disney would be. And so even in the very beginning, they were thinking of the theme parks and like there's just you should build the vision to be that big, right? I'm a big proponent of like think about the biggest way you can change the world. Think about like what that would entail in that like vision dream map and start thinking about it today because you'll think about decisions differently. You'll like move the company differently based on what you actually believe it could be in 10 100 years. So like when I talk to people, I'm like, we're building this to be 100-year brand, right? Like, and that's just a really like it's a number that was like obviously outlasts me. Right? So that's why I think of it in that increments because your vision should be that big. I mean, it's great if you can, but like, so anyways, that's how I think about it. It's like, but constantly this like back and forth, because you do have to be tactical in the tomorrow, and then you have to be like dream big in the 100-year.
I love I'm gonna Google this as soon as we get off. I want to see
No,
this.
it's
It's really,
it's
really
good. It's good.
interesting. Okay, so I like asking people this question, but it's like a fill in the blank. I know I'm being successful when.
When I'm getting energy out of a moment, and I think that we just talked about that a little bit. So much of life is like figuring out what gives you energy, right? And so when you have those moments where you're like, oh man, like this is working, this is great, it like only adds to your energy. When you're working on a career or a profession that like gives you energy because you're so excited about what you're doing and what you're putting out in the world, like that's great. That's success, right? And so um I just feel really strongly about that. And so whatever you need to make you the best, I think, version of yourself that you're energized to change the world, to do things, is like that's what you be focused on. And so I think I like that definition because it doesn't confine you to having a certain kind of career or living your life in a certain way. And there was this interesting conversation. It was at I think it was a conference in Los Angeles that Jeff Bezos had, and they asked him about work-life balance, right? And he's like, "There's no such thing. It's like you should be aware enough though of what's giving you energy. And so if in a moment you're like, if I run these 3 miles, I'm going to feel really good and like be able to be a better version for my family and my friends and my work. That's what you should do. Like, screw the extra project that you wanted to get done, that night or whatever. It's like find things that give you energy, lean into those things, and you will ultimately be more of a whole human. And so I think about that a lot about like what's like giving me energy. And I think that was part of the reason why I switched careers, right? Because I was like, okay, to feel like my most successful self, I want to have like this passion and energy for life and what I'm spending my minutes on. And that was an important part of it. So I think like I can't answer that question without talking about like how you think about energy and what gives you energy.
Yeah, oh, that is so good. I love that answer. And last question is you might kind of have the same type of answer, but what would be your number one piece of advice for a woman who is wanting to start her own business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's so many things. Angela and I always joke that at some point we should co-author a book together, like with all this first-time founder mistakes and all these things that you just like want to impart on the next generation. Um, but honestly, it really is like take the leap, right? And I think like sit with it for some time. Think about, is this going to be something that is really going to give you energy and going to make you want to be um, getting up day in day out and working on it? And like, do you have you thought about it in some sense in a pragmatic way, right? Like, can you see how this evolves, and can you see like the unique vision and strength that you bring to the mission or the company that you want to build? And if you're feeling yes, like in your gut, I think in your gut if this is something that like you're gonna do and you should do, then like let all like don't sit on it too long, because if you sit on it too long, you can always out debate yourself into not doing anything, into the inertia, because that's the easiest thing. And
Yes.
so it's not to say that I'm not trying to say like everyone should like quit their jobs and start a company, because like that's that's like probably not the
Yeah.
case. But
Right.
I think if you have this nagging sensation, and if you like can step back and think about the unique vision that you have to solve a problem and the unique skill sets you might bring, and realizing that you're probably the one to do it, to change the world in that specific way. And so if that's directionally ding ding ding, yes yes yes, then you should just do it. And I think like it really is easy to fall back into not doing things and saying yes to things. And I always joke that like 90% of life is just showing up, right? Just like being like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. Yeah. And those are where all those opportunities get unlocked. And I can point to many moments in my life where it's just because I said yes and I decided to show up, and I moved out of the inertia of like doing of not. So I think like that's an important part, but we could spend hours probably on like all the things that I try to unpack for like someone who's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, for this next generation of entrepreneurs.
Oh, that was such good advice. And I was thinking when you were talking, like our first conversation when we first started this before we were recording, and you're like, I totally forgot this is on my calendar. It's a Saturday, and you look amazing in a blazer and just fully like in your element. And I think that's just the entrepreneur spirit, is just showing up
I
and being
mean,
like,
the
okay, let's do
brilliant.
it.
Let's be real here. The brilliance of a blazer is it takes about 0.2 seconds to put on. So if there was a camera in my room 5 minutes before the call, you would have literally seen me in like some kind of athleisure getup, which is 90%, 99% of my time that I live in. So I like to pretend like I have it all together, and I never, I always, that's the thing I always deprioritize, I feel like, is like being put together. Like some people, I don't know how they do it. I'm like, that's just never been me. But I tried for today. When trying, it's 5 minutes of effort. So,
No, yeah, if anyone's listening, a blazer is the cure to like 90% of your problems. Just throw
yeah,
it on.
it's true. It's
Saves
true. It's
saves a
very
lot
true.
of time. Oh my gosh, Evelyn, thank you so much. This has been really, really inspiring, and I'm really
Oh, thank
excited to
you.
watch just your company grow and the future of Yumi. Where can, I'm sure everyone want to follow you and follow your career. Where can everyone find you?
Well, Yumi itself is on Instagram, like at Yumi, Yumi. HelloYumi.com is our URL. And then you can find me on Twitter, I guess. Twitter, I feel like, is sort of like part of the toolkit of being a journalist. So I
Yeah.
still have my Twitter account. I'm not as active as I used to be, but you can definitely find me there. Just Evelyn Rusli, Rusli. But yeah, I mean, anyone can also email me, Evelyn at helloyumi.com. So I'm here, inbox is here, slide into my DMs. But this has been such a great conversation. You make it so easy. This has been so fun. Thank you for
Oh,
taking the time and for your interest. Like, this is so lovely.
oh my gosh, no, thank you so much. This has been amazing.